Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Vilda Westblanc. I'm a freshman in the School of Foreign Service studying international politics. This semester, I served on the geopolitics team with fellow Dan Lamathy. I've had quite the unique upbringing, as I have lived in 3 different continents and countries, those being Morocco, Cyprus, and now the United States, while being a citizen of France and Sweden. I'm also a member of the Hoya Battalion Army ROTC program here at Georgetown. I've always had a passion for international politics, especially considering my exposure to diverse cultures at such a young, early age. More specifically, how it plays out with war across history and the world today. So I was thrilled to work with Dan this semester and to explore the connection between politics, history, and war. Today, I am deeply honored to introduce our guests this morning. General C.Q. Brown, Jr. is the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff. As chairman, he serves as the nation's highest-ranking military officer and the principal military advisor to the President, Secretary of Defense, and National Security Council. General Brown was commissioned in 1984 as a distinguished graduate of the ROTC program at Texas Tech University. He has served in a variety of positions at the squadron and wing levels and is a command pilot with more than 3,000 flying hours, including 130 combat hours. Notably, General Brown has commanded a fighter squadron, the U.S. Air Force Weapons School, 2 fighter wings, U.S. Air Force's Central Command, Pacific Air Forces, and served as Deputy Commander, U.S. Central Command. Prior to serving as the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, General Brown was the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Now, moderating this conversation is Dan Lamathy. Along with being a current geopolitics fellow, Dan is a national security writer at the Washington Post, focused on covering the U.S. military, its people, and its operations. He has covered military affairs for more than 15 years, traveling extensively, shadowing senior U.S. defense officials at home and abroad, and embedding with U.S. troops everywhere from battles of Afghanistan to the ice flows of the Arctic Ocean. You can join the conversation on social media by tagging @GUPolitics. Now, please join me in welcoming Dan Lamathy and General Brown. Thank you.
General, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's a really special moment for this campus. At the outset, I'd like to thank my student strategy team for being so great this semester, keeping me on track. Not always easy for a journalist. Geopolitics for creating spaces for conversations like these, and also a special thanks to the Bradley Fellows, a group of really impressive active duty officers here at Georgetown working on master's degrees before they return to high-speed jobs at the Pentagon. General, you're just short of 7 months into the chairmanship, and you came in re-emphasizing a catchphrase you adopted while in the Air Force: accelerate change or lose. In another forum yesterday, you said that this is the most dynamic time you've seen in 39 years in uniform. I imagine those things have to be linked. Could you expand a bit on that? What makes this time uniquely dangerous, uniquely challenging, and how's that weave in with sort of the priorities you set at the outset?
There's a lot in that question, Dan. But first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thank you so much for the kind introduction. I appreciate talking to you backstage about your coming here to the United States and being part of Army ROTC. The first thing I do think about is when you think about our national defense strategy and our national security strategies and the 5 challenges that are laid out in those strategies: People's Republic of China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and violent extremists. And all of those are active right now and somewhat interconnected. And that's why I made the comment yesterday, and I've made in other forums, it's probably the most dynamic I've seen it throughout my career. And when you think about those 5 challenges and where they, the capabilities they have and the things they've done to improve themselves, that adds to that, making it dynamic and complex. And so that's why, as the Air Force Chief, I wrote Accelerate, Change, or Lose. Because I really thought that we were not moving fast enough to make sure we have the capabilities and capacity to stay ahead of the threat. If you think about what we've done for the past really 30 years, focused on the Middle East, mostly violent extremism, there's a capability there, but not the capabilities we would face in a future conflict. Personally and professionally, I do not play for second place. And I'm very focused on ensuring that we have all the capabilities to ensure our national security. Our military exists to fight and win our nation's wars, but the goal is not to go to war. The goal is to be so good at what we do. And so part of what I did as I came in as a chairman nearly 7 months ago, I took over on 1 October. On 2 October, I put out a message to the Joint Force. They had 3 expectations. Honing our warfighting skills has primacy in all we do. We need to modernize and aggressively lead with new concepts and approaches, and trust is the foundation of our profession. And so for the first one, honing our warfighting skills has primacy in all we do. We need to be so focused on, in each of our individual services, being good at our primary skill sets. And then how do we bring that together as a joint team? How we bring that together as allies and partners, how we bring together the interagency, so that we are our adversary's worst nightmare. And they don't, every day they wake up, they go, not today. And so that's, the aspect of honing our warfighting skills. The modernization and leading, aggressively leading with the new concepts and approach. We have a joint warfighting concept that outlines how we should operate as a joint force. The services have their concepts. It's how we pull those together. But the modernization piece is to ensure we have the capabilities and capacity that counters the threats, not only the threat we see today, but the threat we project to see in the future. And then last, trust is the foundation of our profession. The first part is the trust that we do right by our service members, that we create an environment where all can reach their full potential. It's the trust that we have with their families and how we take care of their families. Because you bring the service member in, you recruit the service member, but you retain the family. And then the family has a real vote on this. As a matter of fact, I joke about it. My wife signs my mission slip each morning, pins it to my backpack, and lets me come back to the Pentagon one more day. And so our whole family has a vote on this. And then it's the trust we have with our elected officials, for me personally here on with Congress, but our leaders out in the communities. It's with their civic leaders, their mayors, their city councils, and most importantly, trust with the American people, because that's where our force comes from. We're an all-volunteer force, and having that trust is hugely important to ensure that we do the things the nation calls us to do as military members.
Thank you for that. You took over the job at the beginning of October, and not even a week later, we saw the attack on Israel by Hamas. How much does that reframe the priorities you all have? How do you all balance pop-ups like that with sort of the longer view?
Well, exactly. The point is actually how do you not only focus on the crisis of the day, but how do you also balance what you're looking out to the future? And I've said this before I became the chairman. I felt this way as the Air Force Chief of Staff and the other jobs I've held. You've got to balance risk over time. And so you could solve all of the risk today by surging capability to solve that problem, but you solve that problem and create 2 to 3 more. And then what you find is you'll just continue to chase your tail. And so what I personally try to do is I try to step back from a problem. I really try to personally try to project long. And one of the things that I use in mentorship is the same thing I think about when I provide advice. You never want to take short-term satisfaction at the expense of your long-term goals. And so we could have short-term satisfaction or short-term solution that will impact our long-term goals. And that's how you got to think about balancing that. And the challenge there is it's hard to predict the future, but you can see what's happening right now. But I do think it's the aspect of how we shape the future. And so the actions we take today help shape what we'll be able to do in the future, what opportunities we may have, what capabilities we'll have available And I try to balance that back and forth. And I realize that as I do that and provide advice, particularly with our combatant commanders, I don't keep them all happy. And that's not my job to keep them happy. My job is to make sure that we have the capability today and tomorrow. And so that's why I look at it.
As we've looked over the last 7 months now, containing the conflict in Gaza has been a constant challenge. At the beginning of April, we saw the Israeli attack on the Iranian diplomatic compound in Syria. Then we saw the Iranian assault on Israel about 2 weeks later. Can you walk us through that period for you, what it required to kind of keep things contained, and just kind of the nature of trying to keep a lid on something that's kind of volatile?
Well, the first thing I would say is if you go back to, Hamas going to Israel was the end of my first week as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Wasn't, what I had planned for my first week, but it's what came onto the plate there. And from the very beginning, we looked at how do we deter a future conflict, at the same time protected our forces, and then supporting Israel to defend itself. And those were some key areas. In addition to that is making sure we were providing humanitarian assistance and minimizing collateral damage. And so this has been a theme throughout is how do we deter a broader conflict? And the thing I found throughout, since October, because of what happened, it opened up windows of opportunity in certain areas vis-a-vis like the Iranian aligned Shia militia groups to start attacking our forces. You saw what the Houthis were doing in the Red Sea and continue to do. And so you had all these factors of areas to include Israel able to expand to prevent advanced conventional weapons coming in and the strike they did at the 1st of April. And so, as you might imagine, the Department of Defense, we do a lot of planning. And we're always looking at scenarios of what could happen. And as we do that, we prepared ourselves for whatever comes our way. And as we led up to, that week after the Israeli strike, and then as you sense and get more intel, you get a sense of how to posture yourself to be prepared. And knowing that Iran had pretty extensive ballistic missile capability, and that's always been part of our plan, our support to Israel, defense against ballistic missiles. But what you've seen really over the course of the past several years, the change in the character of war with one-way attack drones, that was another factor. And so we were prepared for that as well. And it's a combination of not only what we did and what Israel did, but other nations that were in the region that were able to be postured for that particular day. And I'll just say that, a lot of planning, and also in my job as an advisor, talking with Secretary Austin, talking with our National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, and the rest of the National Security Council and the principals, and also with the President on laying out, how we would do this. And I could not be prouder of the work that was done by our forces in support of Israel, because of what we were able to do, it helped decrease the potential for a broader conflict.
Do you think cooler heads have prevailed now between Israel and Iran on this specific tit for tat?
Well, I think deterrence has been reset, but my concern has been rebaselined. And what I mean by that, this is an unprecedented attack by Iran into Israel with a pretty extensive amount of ballistic missiles and one-way attack drones. And so that bar has been set a bit higher. So that's the part that, when I think about this, how do you bring this threshold for activity back down to a lower level? And to ensure there's not another spark that creates something like this to happen again.
Can you walk us through the night of the 13th a bit? All of us that care about national security, we're watching that night and kind of waiting to see what might happen. As it turns out, 2 fighter squadrons on the American side taking down an excess of 70 or perhaps 80 drones heading to Israel. You're a fighter pilot. What did that night look like? What concerns did you have? And I don't know if that's the potential for a shoot down or a collision or just with so many things in the sky at one time.
The first thing I tell you, I didn't have a lot of concern because I have complete confidence in our force. And they were able to they were well prepared. And so it's really started well before that night. Because actually one of the squadrons arrived just a day prior. And they had to get themselves ready. So they've been getting ready well before they got to the Middle East. And I'd say our process started well throughout that week, not knowing exactly when things would occur. I would also tell you that Saturday, because it was a Saturday, I typically have a daily morning update with the Joint Staff, which is already scheduled. But then a series of phone calls with the Secretary and the like, and then eventually spent most of that evening over at the White House in the Situation Room with the President and others. And really kind of, I wouldn't say play by play, but we were kind of watching what was going on to see, because we also want to be prepared for what happened and what things we would have to do depending on the results. And so a good portion of the evening there at the White House, walking through and, in my role, providing advice and dialogue with the rest of the principals. And then, once it was over, I went back to the Pentagon and then sat down with the team on the Joint Staff, who was tracking a lot of it and feeding information to me and the Secretary to, one, get an update, but also to thank them. Because of the things they're able to do day in and day out, we were well prepared for that. And the challenge there is we made it look easy, but there's a lot of work that goes into this. I mean, tremendous amount of work. And again, that's why I'm so proud, because they make it look easy, but having done stuff like this, I know it's not.
Kind of in the same vein, we're all waiting to see what this U.S. Army pier off the coast of Gaza might look like, how it might take shape. A lot of the predictions had it beginning operations sometime soon. Can you give us a sense for where that stands, what kind of role it might have, if that role has been diminished some as some of the border crossings on land have opened up, and what we should anticipate?
Well, I think the first thing I would highlight is we use this particular capability that the Department of Defense has. What it has done is actually energize various entities on humanitarian assistance above and beyond, and energize the Israelis. The Israelis in support of getting trucks into Gaza, it's been somewhat challenging. Their numbers are coming up. They open up the Ashdod port as well. But what it has done is energize, cooperation with some of the non-governmental organizations, getting capability into Cyprus, and our intent was that this is not to be a long-term solution, but what it has done is start to energize and create dialogue, because it's not only getting humanitarian aid to Gaza, but you got to get it and distribute it internal to Gaza, and so opening up those pieces as well. So as you said. Our intent is to get this in pretty soon, and good dialogue on this, and I'm getting good updates on the capability, and so we're well postured to put it in place, and we're on that path to do that.
We've seen some questions of even today there were reports of mortars being launched at kind of pier assets on land, not at the U.S. forces, but it does raise the question again about security. Do you think this thing can be protected?
Well, force protection is highly important with any operation we do. And matter of fact, I did an update this morning on all the force protection measures that we're putting in place there. But realize as we do things as a military, nothing we do is risk-free. And we understand there is risk, and we do everything we can to mitigate the risk by putting our capability in, working also with the Israelis, also working with other nations that are supporting this effort as well. And so I feel strongly it will be protected. Doesn't mean it won't potentially have some threat against it, but it's something we are focused on and looking at all scenarios of how we protect the pier. We're putting that capability in as we put the pier in as well.
Okay. At Geopolitics, we've talked about Ukraine a fair amount this semester. The last few days, we've obviously seen Congress approve its large aid package for multiple locations, Ukraine being primary there. Most people see that despite that package, Ukraine will continue to be outgunned this year. What do you see as the likely outcome this summer?
Well, one of the things I would highlight to you is that when Ukraine is supplied, they've been able to be effective. If you think about what's happened over the course of the 2+ years, Ukraine was able to fight an army much more capable than itself. It actually was able to not only stop them from, Russia from doing things very quickly. Ukraine was able to gain back 50% of its territory that was lost at the initial parts of the campaign. And so it's been important, the fact that we, support Ukraine to be able to defend itself. It still has access to the Black Sea, and that's the work. And why this aid for Ukraine is so important is because when they're provided with capability, they've been proven been effective. I think the other part that's even broader than this is, what happens in one corner of the world does not stay in one corner of the world. If you think about how World War I and World War II started, it's those kinds of things that, and if unchecked aggression provides opportunity for future aggression, and why this supports Ukraine is, from not only the United States but the 50 nations that help with capability to Ukraine is so important. It does make it challenging in certain areas when that capability is not there, but very much appreciate what Congress has been able to do to get that capability, and we're well postured to start moving capability towards Ukraine to continue to support them.
Here at the Georgetown Institute of Politics and Public Service, we discuss both political service and nonpartisan service. Your appearance here is a good example, of course, of the latter. We're in a time where there's dwindling support for the U.S. military in a lot of polls. There's concerns about American democracy writ large. What does it take to build new faith in the military? Do you see this as cyclical? Do you see this as something that needs additional attention?
Well, that's why, one of my expectations, trust is the foundation of our profession. And part of that, my focus is not only maintain the trust we have, but to continue to build upon it. And I think the most important thing I can do is lead by example. And how I approach and how I engage with our local leadership, how I engage with the American public, and how I carry myself. And I think that is hugely important. And also thinking about the aspect of the things we do as military members to stay nonpartisan and out of politics. I talked about leading, by example. And the first thing we've got to do is know and follow the rules. And I would bookend that is to make sure that we stay true to our oath. Our oath is to the Constitution of the United States, to an ideal, not to a leader, not to an office. And in the middle of that, about a year plus ago, almost a year and a half ago, there was previous secretaries of defense and previous chairmen of the Joint Chief that signed an open letter that described 16 points of how we should carry ourselves, not only in the civilian, but also not only in the military, but also in civilian, in these potentially politically charged times. And I think it's a good example of the things that we should be thinking about as military leaders, but those that are in aspects of service, whether they're in the uniform or not, the things we can do to ensure that we are focused on our national security and how we work together.
This being an election year, that becomes especially challenging. We often see retired generals endorsing candidates. We often see, I shouldn't say often see, sometimes see active duty service members who appear in one campaign venue or another. What's your message, I guess, to both communities? The active duty service members is, I think, a little more clear. The retired community, there's a lot of different thoughts there.
Well, I think that's why the open letter was laid out by those previous secretaries of defense and previous chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And I can almost echo what I just said is, particularly for our uniform members. It doesn't say in those rules, it doesn't say that you can't vote, that you can't contribute money to a particular political campaign. But the key part is, the things and how you do that and how you carry yourself. And by being a military member, there are certain privileges that you do have to make sure you pay attention to. And by being nonpartisan. And so you got to think about it. When I was much younger, social media wasn't a thing; didn't exist. But what you post, what you say, how you respond, how you carry yourself, all sends a message, intended or unintended. And that's why we've just got to, as leaders, set the example. And then for those who don't follow that example, we got to, I wouldn't say hold them to account, but we got to make sure we correct them and go, hey, this is probably, I recommend you take this approach. And it goes back to knowing the rules.
What's your perspective on the retired community endorsing candidates?
It's not helpful. It blurs the line and doesn't set the example for active service members. And they go, well, if they can do it, why can't I? And having had a chance to talk to some of our senior retired officers who have a different perspective and really feel the same way I do, they've often told me they can help me help us by engaging with those who are doing things that are not helpful to the military. Because what it does, it puts it challenges us, those of us that are still in uniform, to maintain that trust. Marshall, General George C. Marshall, who was Secretary of the Army during World War II, Secretary of State, and Secretary of Defense, talked about whether you're in uniform or out of uniform, you still represent the military. Particularly when you retire and you say, General retired or Admiral retired, you still get yourself connected to the military, and it doesn't help those of us that are wearing a uniform. It makes it, I would say, a bit more challenging to make sure we stay nonpartisan out of politics.
Okay. This is a community event. I wanted to make sure we had ample time for questions, so we'll throw it open to the general for questions there. We'll be coming around with microphones. Please wait for the microphone. I also please remember that we're trying to get in as many questions as we can, so we're looking for questions, not speeches. Try to keep it succinct. First question, if we could go to Captain Trevor Barton.
General, thanks so much for being here. We appreciate your time. One of the questions I had is we're part of the Omar Bradley Fellowship. We're getting ready actually to transition from our academic tenure to moving into the Pentagon, but part of this program requires us to study national defense issues, and my focus has been on the defense industrial base, so my question relates to that. Specific to the defense industrial base, sir, we've seen a lot of open source media indicate that I think your predecessor, General Dunford, indicated the defense industrial base is brittle, or that its ability to surge capacity is somewhat limited. What is your assessment as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of the current health of the defense industrial base related to our production capability, and what can policymakers do to increase the resiliency of the defense industrial base?
Well, I would say it's not as brittle as it was maybe under General Dunford. And I think he's probably made that comment if you go back to about the 2018 time frame, 2017, 2018. When you think about, that was when North Korea was very active. We had to really take a hard look at our capability and capacity and how we would surge. And I think one of the things for our nation, we're really good at designing things, but we really offshored, in some cases, our manufacturing capability. And at the same time, there was things we did to, as a department, as a nation, to combine much of our defense industrial base. And so the thing I've been thinking through is the aspects of how we strengthen the defense industry. So it's a bit stronger now because of the focus on Ukraine and really energizing. But there's key things that, from a policymaker standpoint, that I think are very important. Consistency is probably top of the notch. And what I mean by that, there's consistency in our demand signal from the Department of Defense of what we need, and then consistency in resourcing. Okay, and when you have that consistency, that helps to predictability for defense industrial base, so they know, supply chains, they get their vendors, they get their workforce, and it's a steady flow. Okay, that builds trust, and with that trust, it also drives down cost. When it's uncertain, then decreases trust and it ups cost, because they're going to say, I'm going to charge you a bit more as an insurance policy because I'm not sure what's going to happen tomorrow, and I want to keep your workforce. And so what we've got to continue to do is work to get consistent man signal and prioritization from the Department of Defense. We've got to work with Congress for consistent funding. I've been a general officer for 15 years, and 1/3 of that we've been in continuing resolutions, meaning we didn't get a budget on time. And when you don't have a budget on time, you can't get new starts to start new capability. You can't increase production. And so it basically challenges, the defense industrial base. So they have to sit and wait because we can't write a contract to them until, later. And so they sit and wait. They try to keep the workforce. They try to keep a supply chain. And after a while, particularly for the small vendors, they tend to walk away. And so it's those kinds of things that we continue to work on. And I've had a chance here recently. I've been out to a shipyard. Been out to a place that we build our HIMARS weapon system. I went to our ammunition depot and talked to them about this very topic. And it was loud and clear. Consistency really does help them to help us to make sure we have the capability we require. Thank you.
Okay. We'll take some hands here in the front. And second one behind. We have one mic or two? Or two. Okay. The second one back there.
Thank you, General Brown, for coming today. My name is Cadet MJ Neenal, and I'm here with some of our Detachment 130 cadets. My class is about to commission next May. As new young lieutenants coming in this uniquely dangerous and challenging time and this uniquely politically charged time, what are some things you think we need to specifically pay attention to as we're learning our career fields?
Well, the first thing I'd tell you, just if you go back to what I said about honing your warfighting skills, whatever job you're going into, get really good at it. Okay, that's probably the most important thing you can do. At the same time, though, we all need to be paying attention to geopolitical areas because that's where we have a better sense of where the threat is, where the world's headed. I came in during the Cold War, so it was pretty easy because it was just the Soviet Union, and you weren't focused on all the things we have. So it's much more complex, and so having a good sense of that complexity as a junior officer makes you a better leader. At the same time, very focused on the things, whatever career field you go into, you get really good at that career field, and you balance it between two of those. I'd also say ask a lot of questions. Okay, there are no dumb questions, and when you ask tough questions of your leaders, it challenges us. That's why it makes me nervous when I come to events like this sometimes because you guys come up with some really good questions. But what it does, it sharpens me as a leader. When I get tough questions. So by you asking tough questions, delving into why are we doing this? How does it impact the mission? Because you're going to lead young service members, and they're going to ask, how does this tie to the bigger picture? And you want to be able to help explain that to them. But what they do has an impact broader than they probably ever would appreciate or know. But you're going to be that connectivity to help them understand, why what they do is so important. Thanks.
General, thank you so much for coming in today. And France has recently communicated that a Western presence on the ground in Ukraine is something that can't be ruled out, even though that may be limited. And even more recently, Poland has communicated their openness to hosting strategic weapons within their borders. What is your reaction to these developments? And going forward, how do we temper escalation while maintaining unity in NATO?
Well, that's part of the conversation as each of these nations have these various thoughts and communicate those. It's how do we collectively have conversations about how those are either helpful to our cause as NATO or how that might escalate things. And so I think the one area that I would highlight to you that helps us work through this is, for me personally, my dialogue I have with my counterparts. I've been in the job for about 7 months. I've probably had about 160 engagements with my counterpart, the French Chief of Defense. I was supposed to talk to you this week. It's going to be on Monday now. And so I have a regular, battle rhythm of calls so we can talk about these and the impact and the different perspective. And realize as a military leader in my job, I provide advice. And so by having these conversations, just like my French counterpart, my Polish counterpart, because you still have your political leadership that makes the ultimate decision. But we've got to talk about what the risk is to maybe doing something one way or another. And that's the role we have as senior military leaders. Thanks.
A couple more hands. One in the back there, and Anna on the left there as well.
General, you mentioned your job is to give advice. I'm just curious, what are some common frustrations that you've observed in your career that military folks have in advising political leaders? And what advice do you give to both military and civilian leaders to make those conversations have more mutual understanding of each other's positions and perspectives?
Yeah, so a couple of things I would highlight. The first thing is when you're providing advice, you need to understand your boss and your boss's boss and their intent, what they're focused on. And so in my current position, my boss is the Secretary of Defense, and my boss's boss is the President of the United States. And so I got to understand kind of what they're dealing with so that my advice doesn't become just a throwaway. Because if I don't put it in context to the other things that they're thinking through, it just doesn't fit into the bigger picture. I personally haven't had frustrations, but I know from some of my staffs at various levels get frustrated. Because what they'll do is they'll build a perfect military solution devoid of the other things I just talked about, understanding what's going on geopolitically, what other things are going on economically, diplomatically, and how this option that we've laid out is the best thing we could think of from a military standpoint, but it has to factor in and meet up with what the Department of State's doing, what Commerce is doing, and that's where the frustration comes in. And it's interesting that sometimes when folks will put something on a slide that says, if you don't do this, it's unacceptable. To me, that's a challenge. If you say it's unacceptable, they may tell you, no, we're going to do this. It just became acceptable. And so our job here is to not only talk about if we don't use this military, what is the risk? What's the impact if we don't use this military piece and how it factors in with these other areas? And so as I try to provide advice, I'd really try to spend time getting smarter, not just on the military part, but the other factors around that, so that what I'm advising or proposing fits in with the bigger picture. And so that's a part I think is what I would, particularly as you get to the senior level. How does this fit into the bigger picture? And it's more likely to be accepted if it feels like it can fit versus it's a round peg you're trying to put in a square hole, or vice versa. Thanks.
So about 4 weeks ago, the Treasury Department announced sanctions on 2 Russian companies that played a role in the Kremlin's influence operations in the United States as far as aid to Ukraine. If your goal is to accelerate, what role should the military play in addressing the cyber front, which is increasingly more salient?
Well, we have United States Cyber Command, and they play a key role not only on the military piece, but how they work with Homeland Security and other parts of our government on cyber capabilities. But it's not just the cyber capabilities, but when you think about what happens in disinformation and influence campaigns, just like you described, the role to be able to identify, from a military standpoint, having the intelligence to understand what's actually happening versus the information that's saying something different, and then being able to parse between the two and then help to provide that difference into our decision-making process, so we have a better understanding of what is actually happening. At the same time, how do we use that to help influence based on the way we would message or communicate? And we've got to do that much faster because of the ability of cyber and social media and other areas today. Information moves so quickly, and so it's very easy for disinformation to just take in a direction and not have the real information. And so that's the part that it's an area I know we have to improve upon to be able to respond much more quickly in this cyber environment. Thank you.
2 more. One right in the front, and then 2 rows right behind him.
Thank you, General, for your time today. Your motto is accelerate, change, or lose. And I was curious, I'm also an Air Force ROTC cadet, a sophomore. And how do you see that quote applying to leadership as well? I know we've talked a little bit about it applying to assets and platforms, but how does that also apply to leadership?
Well, in some cases I played against myself because I also say sometimes slow down, you can get there faster. And so it really depends. And when I think about accelerate, change, or lose, it is really taking a hard look at the areas of the things that are really important that you need to focus on and accelerate. And then which means you're going to have to shed, as a pilot, you got to shed some drag, a little more thrust in certain areas. And so you got to be able to identify that, which is why I said you got to step back from sometimes and look at what the problem is and figure out how best to move forward. At the same time, I've also talked about slow down, you can get there faster. Because you can do, if you don't have the analysis to go with it, you can accelerate, but go accelerate completely in the wrong direction. Which is why sometimes you need to step back and slow down a little bit. Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is a good example. Type 1 problems, type 2 problems. Certain problems you can solve very quickly, move fast. Others you got to take a little bit of time and think through them. And then I think the other part that I would also highlight is there's solutions that are one-way solutions, and some that are two-way, or one-way door or two-way door. One-way door, once you go through that door, you can't come back. You might want to slow down on some of those. The two-way door, you could go through it, fail, and turn around and come back and try again. And so, as a leader, you got to determine, what are those decisions you're trying to make, and you set the tempo as a leader, are the ones you accelerate, and those that you have to kind of slow down a little bit to ensure you don't, as I say, there's a fine line between leaning forward and falling over. So.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Lewis. I'm conducting my program in Applied Intelligence at the School of Continuing Studies. I tried to carry on the legacy of warfighters who look like me, and I tried to look up to role models, and you're definitely one of them. Who are some of your role models or individuals that have inspired you, whether civilian or military?
Well, I'd start with my dad. My dad did 30 years Army, retired Army colonel, and the whole reason I'm doing this is all his idea. So I was a senior in high school and junior in high school. He told me 4 years in the military will not hurt you. That's a quote. And so he talked to me about going to the academies. And I said, I'm not that interested in the military. And he talked to me about ROTC because he had taught ROTC after his second tour in Vietnam. It was really a way to pay my way through school. And so I applied for all three, got to the interview process for all three scholarships, didn't go to the Navy interview because I knew I didn't want to be in the Navy. I ended up in both an Army and Air Force scholarship, and I was getting a degree in engineering, and my dad said, not so sure you'd be an engineer in the Army because there'll be needs in the Army. If you go Air Force, they'll make you an engineer. So I went Air Force and almost quit after the first semester. And I got a ride in a T-37, and when I went to summer camp, I go, God, that was fun. And that was kind of the start for me on my path to be a pilot and where I am today. I think the other that has been an inspiration for me is the Tuskegee Airmen, just in general. What they were able to do during leading up to World War II and in World War II, and then over time having a chance to meet with them. And one that I really got to know fairly well before he passed away was Charles McGee. And just spending time, the first time I met him was in the foyer of the National Cathedral. And I was a four-star at the time. I was speechless. I mean, I didn't know what to say to him. And then later, when I became the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, we were taping something for the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. And we're doing it on the mall right in front of the Lincoln Memorial. He was there before I got there. And when I came up, he was in his uniform and I was in my uniform. And he stood up. He's about 100 years old at the time. Saluted me and said, "I'm so honored to see you." I go, "I'm so honored to see you." And we kept going back and forth about who was more honored. But just, spending time talking to him, and then since then meeting others, and there's only a handful, there's only 2, maybe 3 left that flew in combat. But having a chance to meet them and talk to them about their stories. And then I think the last thing I would say that inspires me is those I've been privileged to lead. Those that I've had a chance to spend time around and then watch them grow in their careers. And then in some cases, them saying, "Hey, you've been an inspiration to me." And I go, "Well, I'm just doing my job. But if I can open the door for somebody else behind me, that's my goal." Thanks.
We'll go to Will, and then right next to him.
Thank you. Thank you very much, General, for being here. One of the things we've discussed in Dan's discussion group is Ukraine's use of commercially available FPV drones to have a potent impact on the battlefield. How is the United States planning to combat the use of these and other similar proliferated, widely available, almost jerry-rigged technologies by our adversaries, and also to embrace and leverage them within our own forces?
Well, one of the things I do really like about what I've seen Ukraine to be able to do with this is just the aspect of innovation. And I will just tell you, it's something I've been focused on as the Air Force Chief of Staff. I still feel that way as the chairman. And when you're looking at this innovation and this, what I would call the changing character of war, we've got to make sure we are able to stay ahead on this particular capability that that we see as a potential threat, but also how do we actually put that in our toolkit as well. And one of the things that I think has been as I've spent time and gone out to Silicon Valley several times and met with venture capitalists, there's two things that we got to be able to do. One, we got to be willing to fail, because that's how you do innovation. And then on the other part of that is we got to be able to work more closely, the Department of Defense, with the innovation piece. And we got to build, we often talk about the valley of death. You have a prototype, and then how do you make it a program that you're going to scale? We talk about the bridge across the valley. We've got to build the bridge to the innovators, versus the innovators figure out which door to go knock on in the Pentagon and figure out they keep knocking on the door. After a while, they get tired of knocking on the door. And so we got to do some things to really bring that in. And this goes to the point of accelerate, change, or lose. How do we work our budget cycle? How do we work our authorities? All these things we can bring innovation, because the threat's going to change, and we got to be able to change very quickly with it. And particularly since things are so much more software defined today, you just got to build it big enough where it has enough computing power, enough cooling space that you can change the software and make it still be a capable platform. And at the same time, the last thing I'd say on this is we want to have a balance of capability and capacity. You can have high-end capability that's very expensive, which means you have low capacity, or you can have low capability, a lot of capacity because it's not as expensive. You need to have both. And so you need to figure out, that's one of the things I'm focused on, making sure we have capability and capacity to challenge the high-end threats and the low-end threats as well. Thanks.
Thank you for being here, General. My question relates to the South Pacific. U.S. military presence on islands in the South Pacific like Guam and Tinian is crucial to the United States' ability to respond to Chinese influence in the region, but these islands are particularly vulnerable, and our infrastructure on these islands is particularly vulnerable to rising sea levels, climate change, extreme weather events. To what extent do you think these environmental concerns constitute a national security threat, and what does the U.S. military need to respond to them?
Well, they do. I've had 5 assignments to Florida, and I did 2 years in Hawaii, and I've probably tracked more typhoons in my 2 years in Hawaii than my 5 assignments in Florida. That ranged over about 12, 13 years. And so I really do have a sense of the impact it has on our ability to have locations to operate out of, and how we have resilience in at those various locations. And just the climatic conditions there, things will sit there and just rust out if they're not in a climate control environment or undercover. And so I think the other part, not just from an aspect of generating combat power, but it's the aspect of how climate impacts economics, which drives stress, which drives to national security. And so it becomes a national security issue, and not only for us, but for our allies and partners in the region and for those Pacific Island nations. And so we've got to think long about, how do we counter some of these things. Now, Department of Defense isn't going to solve climate change, but there are things we can do to make ourselves more resilient, to drive down the risk to our national security and to the security of our allies and partners. Thanks.
All right, 2 more. Lou, can we get in the back as well?
Thank you, Chairman, for coming to Georgetown today. Some of the past few weekends here at Georgetown, we've had students who are admitted for the class of 2028, and there have been a few who have mentioned their interest in programs like ROTC. What would be your message to students like that? Why get involved with the U.S. military? Choose the ROTC. Why would you choose that future?
I would say 2 things. One, the opportunity to serve your nation, but the opportunity to gain some valuable experience. And my whole thing was I really was going to do 4 years and get out and move back to Texas. 39 years, I've never been assigned in Texas. I'm from San Antonio originally. But I do think about the leadership opportunities you get. the challenge you get, and every challenge you get, just like working out, it makes you stronger. It's those things that when I look back at my own career, all the things I've been able to do. I flew F-16s most of my career. I've since flown 20 different aircraft. I still get to fly. I flew last week. I've traveled to every continent. I've sat across the table from people that I've read about that I go, holy cow, what the hell am I doing here? And just the leadership challenges I've had. And you don't have to stay for 40 years. You can do 4 years. But it's that opportunity and the people you get a chance to meet and the friends I have. I have friends all over the world. My best friend lives here in Washington, D.C. He retired. Actually, I did his retirement back in 2011. But we're still best friends because of the time we spent together. I just think the opportunity to give back, but the opportunities and experiences you gain that you can never imagine. My dad, my dad is a mentor. We lived in Germany when I was in middle school, and he talked about you will get to do things most kids only read about. As an officer in the United States Air Force, I've been able to do things most people only read about. And I think those are the reasons why I would encourage someone to really think about serving our nation. I think about inspiring the next generation, the things you will be able to do, because we need you. Whether you serve in uniform or you serve in some other part of government, that's what makes our democracy so strong. And so I appreciate the question.
Hello. Just thank you so much for coming and talking to us. I wanted to ask about competition between the services. Do you think we need to revisit the Goldwater-Nichols Act? Or more broadly, how do you promote cooperation between these very different cultures from the Air Force to the Army, et cetera?
Well, I think iron sharpens iron. And so some of that friction and service rivalry is good. And each of the services has their expertise in their respective domains. But we do have to work together. We're all part of the same team. It's no different from a football team. Not everybody's going to be a lineman, not everybody's going to be a quarterback or receiver or defensive back. And so we all have different skill sets that come together to make the team strong. Now, when you think about Goldwater-Nichols that forced the services to work closely together, sometimes Congress has to get involved to get us to play well together. That was one of those. I think we are actually in a pretty good spot based on the things we've been able to do on the battlefield together and day to day. As I look at my role as the chairman, in the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act, it laid out the term global integrator for the chairman. But it was also strategic planning, strategic focus, and that's what I take on as a chairman. And part of that is how do I work with the services to say, I know what's good for your service, but what's good for the joint team? What's good for the nation? And we got to put aside our parochial interests maybe by service and say, what do we need to do? And there's really some give and take. And what I really try to do is actually look at beyond today. And when you do that, you can base it on analysis as well. Because there could be a lot of emotion between services, but how do you base it on facts and analysis? And then from there, be able to say, this is what we need to do as a joint force. And then how do I, as an advisor, make that recommendation to the services, to the secretary, to help get us down a path. But I would tell you, just having said as a Joint Chief for the past 3 years, as a Air Force Chief, having worked with my counterparts, we're all on the same team. We work together, but a little bit of friction here and there, a little bit of rivalry is good because it does make us stronger. Thanks.
All right, I think we have time for just one or two more. Right here, and Ryan in the front as well.
Thank you so much, General, for being here. My name is Camille Grayson. I serve as the Assistant Director of Employer Outreach and Engagement for the School of Foreign Service. One of the major highlights for me in this conversation is the terms of knowing your requisite skills and being really good at them. If you could offer us as students, faculty, and staff, where should we be putting our energy at a granular level when it comes to our skills? For example, languages, artificial intelligence, et cetera, there? Well,
that's a good question. I mean, I could pick different areas, and but I guess I tend not to do that because everyone has a different skill set. Fact, 50% of the world is below average. 50% of the people in this room right now are below average. But the question is below average at what? And so if you're a 2, you could work on a scale of 1 to 10. If you're a 2, you could work really hard to get yourself to 4, 5, or 6 and be slightly above, slightly below. Or if there's something you're a 7 or 8 at, you may be good in AI, or you may have a good language skill, and you work really hard and get yourself to 8, 9, or 10. And so my recommendation is to self-assess and figure out where your skills are, and those things you're a 2 at, my recommendation is just give up. Work on the things you're really good at, but find somebody who's really good at the things you're a 2 at and make them part of your team. Teamwork and bringing a team together is so important for us to be effective, because you can't be good at everything. And if you're not good in languages, you're going to beat your head against the wall doing, trying to learn a language where someone else is really good at that. Just have them come with you, whatever you're trying to get done. Or someone's really good on AI, or someone's really good on computers, or someone's just a good diplomat. Those are the kinds of things you want to do, and that's why building your network, and that's why I say relationships matter. You never want to cold call in a crisis. You never want to burn a bridge. And you really want to think about those that you can bring to be part of your team, be part of your community, part of your network, to fill in those holes that you probably don't have. And I personally try to do that because I know there's some things I'm not good at, but I do know the things I am good at, and I try not to put myself in a situation to go start speaking in a foreign language when I took 3 years of French and haven't used it since high school. And so it's those kinds of things that I do think about, and those are the areas I would highlight. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Chairman, for coming to speak with us today. My name is Ryan. I was on Dan's SST, and I'm also covering this event today for The Hoya, the school's newspaper. I want to bring this back to a comment that you made last October with regard to Iran, where you told, quote, Iran not to get involved in the conflict between Israel and Palestine on your flight to Brussels. If you could talk to the Iranian regime right now, if you had a message for them, what would that be, and what would your message be, considering that their renewed involvement in this conflict?
I think my message would be pretty much the same. And you saw what happened here a couple weeks ago. Iran used a lot of capability, not quite effective as I'd imagine they hoped it to be. But the key aspect is I don't know that any one of us wants to have a major conflict in the Middle East, to include Iran. And the things they do could be the spark to a broader conflict. And you need to think twice about how they respond and how they act, how they use their proxies within the region as well. And so, again, our goal is not to go to conflict, and we want to make sure that as we operate in the region, as we say things publicly, to ensure they understand our goal not to get to conflict. But we will defend ourselves. I mean, we will defend our national interests and defend ourselves. And we have a very, very capable force. United States military is the most combat credible, most respected force in the world. And I just know that from a fact when I talk to all my counterparts, because they ask questions about what are we going to do. And as leaders don't stand on the sidelines. We lead. And it's impressive. That's why I'm so proud of our force and the things they're able to do.
I'd like to sneak in a last one, because I think it would be relatable for a lot of the students in the room. You mentioned that first semester being really hard and really having second thoughts. How'd you get over that?
Well, I went back and talked to my dad. It was partly because there's a couple of things. I was doing a dual degree program in architecture and civil engineering, and the only final grade F on my academic record was freehand drawing in the architecture department. That should have been a sign, because I dropped architecture. Well, actually, architecture dropped me after 2 years. But the ROTC, they really wanted me involved in everything. And I was on the drill team, and they wanted me to do all the intramurals. And I told my dad, I'm not sure. I want to hang out with the guys in my dorm, because I was doing intramurals with them. And so when I came home at Christmas, my dad, I talked to him about it. He goes, well, and plus, the other thing was, as a freshman, we had to wear a uniform on Thursdays. And there was only 7 freshmen wearing uniforms on Thursdays, so you stood out like a sore thumb in your classes. And my dad said, the only thing you had to do for the scholarship is go to class and go to lab. And that's what I did for the next year and a half, until I went to summer camp and got that airplane ride. And then I came back, and I ended up being the cadet corps commander, and got a pilot slot my first semester my senior year. And it just changed. Summer camp I had a blast, and it changed my perspective. And so I guess if I had just one piece of advice is, never close the door. And I almost closed the door on myself. I probably would have been successful doing something else. I don't know what it would have been. But I've been having a blast doing this. I really have. I enjoy what I do. I enjoy coming to work each day. I enjoy the challenges I have to face. I enjoy, most importantly, making a difference.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.